Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Nerdstrodamus. I'm Dr. Pants.
I'm Lambo.
And today, we're going to talk about a little bit more serious of a topic.
Yeah, so what's been kind of going on out there in the world is kind of scary in some places, you know?
The world's a scary place.
Yeah. And, we'd like to live in our happy little Nerdstrodamus world here where everything's happy and green. You can't see that it's green. Only we can.
I mean, we could make it green for a split second. But anyway, no, we enjoy fun and we like to talk about video games, and that's how we enjoy ourselves. But the truth is in the real world, video games aren't all fun.
Yeah, and there can be real life consequences to decisions people make that could maybe be influenced by games. Is that something?
Specifically, yes. And that topic is always violence.
Yeah. So,
in recent months, the topic of violence in video games has come back to the forefront. Yeah. It's always kind of been there.
Oh, it's always, and then anytime some violent happening, occurs, we have shootings, we have horrible things happening out there in the world. We start kind of trying to shift blame, and we kind of look at things that have influences, especially over younger people.
Right. And video games, especially now that everybody's playing them on any device they may have, it's got to be the question of, is this an issue?
Yeah.
Is the violence in video games an issue? Especially one of the biggest ones is Fortnite, which is a shooter.
Yeah.
So our president brought it up.
Just this past summer.
Right.
And also video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts.
It is in the public consciousness right now. And, while we can say, where is the evidence, there still is simulated violence going on in people's video game lives every day.
Does that have an impact on people?
And we're going to talk about that. Even on such a serious topic, I'm going to find a way to lighten things up before we get started, though.
Okay.
You ready for this?
Yes.
So here's what I'm going to do. I went to the ESRB website. And if you're not familiar with the ESRB, they were the very, very first ones to give a rating system to American games.
This is why we have things like teen, mature, everyone, E10. Is E10 still a thing?
Yeah.
Okay. But that's why we have those. And again, that's not a government sanctioned thing. That's just a private institution that did it, unlike movies and stuff.
Well, no, movies are also a private institution.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So the MPAA is a private group of people who,
Well, I
learned something.
I did learn something.
But yeah, they're really not regulated in any sort of way. So when they come up with their ratings, there's sometimes a little bit of stuff behind it. Okay. What I've really found to be interesting is that how things have changed over time. We sort of look at certain video games as being, not as bad as we once thought they were.
Right.
So here's how it works. You buy a video game, you see the rating, that tells you, what it's rated for. Sort of like when you go see a movie.
Right.
And on the back, they give a more detailed explanation of the kinds of content that's inside the game.
A couple of topics based on the violence, the language.
Yeah. And so what I have for you right here is a list of a bunch of things that you can be rated, teen or M for. Yep. Blood, mature humor.
Hold on. It says animated blood, and then realistic blood and gore. How are these different? Is all the blood animated in a video game?
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how many of these things were for the game. I'll tell you the rating, and then you're going to tell me which ones you think they were.
These are all games I've played, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Okay.
The first one, we're going to go back to the granddaddy of them all. Specifically, the one that, was the first one I ever played with a whole ton of blood in it was Mortal Kombat 2.
Okay.
There were two reasons why this game was rated M for mature.
Okay.
Back on the Super Nintendo, the Sega Saturn, the PS1, the PlayStation, and the Sega Genesis.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's two reasons.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming you want me to pick from here and give you those two reasons. I'm going to say animated blood.
You are incorrect. This was actually listed as realistic blood and gore.
Ah, I was going between the two, and I couldn't figure out which one it was going to be. Okay, but there's another one then, right?
Yeah.
Is it intense violence?
It's realistic violence, but it's still close. So
Okay.
I'll give you one ding for that.
Okay.
But you're good. Ding, ding, ding.
Thanks.
Yeah. So Mortal Kombat 2. This is a tougher one in general.
Yeah.
So the original Grand Theft Auto.
Okay.
For Windows, PC, and PlayStation only.
Okay.
Had two reasons it was rated M for mature.
I'm gonna say animated blood for this one.
Animated blood.
Okay, I got that one. You said there's 2 total?
Yeah. You're gonna be surprised at the other one because it's not gonna be what you think.
Is it drug reference?
No.
Oh.
No. It was rated M for animated blood and strong language. No violence. No violence.
Wait.
Yeah, right?
Okay.
Those are the 2 reasons listed for the Windows PC and the PlayStation, right on the ESRB website.
Oh.
I know, right?
Oh. All right.
All right, next one. Now this is the best one. Okay, I'm gonna read you this. So I'm gonna tell you the first one. You got to tell me what also got added.
Okay.
So Final Fantasy VII. I actually remember before it came out, there was a little bit of like, oh, there's gonna be a lot of swearing. It's gonna have some adult, things going on in it.
Okay.
It was rated T for teen for the PlayStation, for comic mischief, mild animated violence, and mild language.
Okay.
Okay. Now, when it got re-released and re-rated for the PlayStation 4, when it came out last year,
Right.
a bunch of stuff got added to it.
Is it all the original things?
No, it's none.
Oh, they
of
completely
them.
changed.
It's none of them.
None of them.
If you can name me 3 of them, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 listed. It's gonna blow your mind when you see them. But go for it.
Use of tobacco and alcohol.
That is, yes.
Language.
Language is listed, yes.
Crude humor.
And crude humor. Okay, right. The other ones that are listed here are violence, blood, sexual themes, and partial nudity.
I was actually thinking sexual themes and partial nudity. I was considering those.
So
Okay.
so it's just so strange that in about 20 years time, our threshold for rating these kinds of things changed so much.
Well, I mean, that kind of goes into what we need to talk about, and it's when this first started as to now, how violence in games has changed.
Just for me, I don't know how comic mischief became crude humor. That's such a change to me. And you know what? One of the things I think it is, I actually think it's the Don Corneo scene.
Oh, yeah.
Because back then, something like that, like cross-dressing, was seen as a joke, right? Oh, it's hilarious, ha ha ha. It's like most of what British comedy has been built upon for the last 50 years.
It's also probably the things they say to Don Corneo to get him to talk.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
But now, now that we're trying to, the world is a little bit more accepting of, people who are trans human beings. I think a little bit of that has now changed the way we're going to view it, and it's going to be considered crude humor now.
I would agree.
Violence.
So, as we said, it's come up lately, and when it got brought up recently, they talked about the ESRB and how it needs to be. There need to be some changes. They specifically said the ESRB isn't doing its job. But let's talk about the ESRB.
Yeah.
Because it is the rating system that started back in the 90s.
Yeah, we were young. I think we were in, 2nd or 3rd grade?
Yeah. And
Pretty
back
young.
then, we didn't have the same ratings we do now.
No.
We didn't have E10 and all that.
No, we had kids to adults.
Yep, K to A.
Teen, mature. And there was an AO rating, but immediately when they came up with all these ratings, all major retailers said that they would never carry a game that was considered adults only. And to this day, they still have
That rating still exists.
Yeah, it does.
But you'll never see it sold in...
Yeah, it's sort of like the X rating in the other movies. It's to deter certain amounts of content. They will rate it that so that people will scale back the amount of violence and other things in their games.
The only game I can think of that technically has an AO rating is San Andreas.
Retroactively. Yeah.
Retroactively because of the hot coffee scene.
I know Agony very recently was in intense danger of being... Yeah.
We talked about that.
Yeah.
We actually brought that up. So why was the ESRB created? Because it's been in our lifetime. It was the early 90s. We were kids. We played games that had no ratings.
Yeah. Most of our... I can show you most of my old cartridges still for my Super Nintendo, and almost all for the Nintendo. I don't think there was hardly any.
No.
There were some that were released towards the end of the Super Nintendo life cycle that I'm sure had ratings. I remember the first one that actually came with a warning. It wasn't an official rating, but I remember my Super Nintendo copy of Mortal Kombat 2 did come with a mature warning label on it. That was not a rating. It was just, this game has a lot of blood and violence, and be careful.
Because we were at a time where games were now, the graphics were improving to the point that you could have a game like Mortal Kombat or Mortal Kombat 2 where the people look realistic. In fact, they basically used photos to make the sprites.
Yes.
And so you had realistic people beating each other, blood spurting out, and in the case of some fatalities, ripping spines out. Some pretty intense violence, especially for a game at the time.
Yeah, and I found especially arcade games. really rode this kind of thing for a while. That it was a tentpole kind of idea that like, oh man, if you had lots of blood and gore in your game, people would crowd around the arcade machine and want to play.
It was a gimmick. It was a selling point of the game. Mm-hmm. Something like Primal Rage kind of used that.
Yeah, and that was also an arcade game at the time. Primal Rage had an interesting kind of thing happen to it, though, as well. Primal Rage was a fighting game. It was kind of lame.
You played it as dinosaurs, giant monkeys, that kind of thing.
And one of the characters, his name was Chaos. He had a finishing move in which he, relieved himself.
He would urinate on his opponent.
And, to an 8-year-old me who rented the game, it was like, whatever. You don't think twice about that kind of stuff. Plus it was a finishing move. You had to know the move. It wasn't in the instruction manual. That's the way they used to be. You had to buy those little inserts inside all the gaming magazines to figure out finishing moves back in the day. Oh, it was such a different time.
So hard.
But there was the story about this mother who saw her son playing the game. The Super Nintendo version actually didn't have the finishing move in it. Yeah, but the kid had the Genesis version. And she saw the finishing move, and she got so enraged, she went to the store and ripped all the copies of the game off the shelf.
Well, I mean,
yeah, that happened.
What was the game rated?
It was rated T for teen.
Do we know how old the child was?
It sounded like from the story he was 8 or 9.
Okay,
around my age.
I mean, fair enough. Yeah. But this was the early day of ratings, and they're put in there to warn people of these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of people watching this might say, "So he peed on a guy? Like, what's the big deal?" With all the other games, but see that kind of goes into the early days of violence were so different than nowadays.
Yeah,
and on a more serious note with the stories, we have something like the Columbine incident.
Yeah,
back in the 90s.
1999.
Yeah,
and the video game Doom kind of came into the forefront
because we have a big thing about this video game led them to do this and everything, and
especially because at that time Doom was so ubiquitous. If you owned a PC in the 90s, there was like an 80% chance you've had Doom on your computer at some point. Yeah,
I mean I didn't, but
that's just the way it was,
Right.
And by that time it was already 6-7 years old. So many people had access to it that it felt like, oh, here's this dangerous thing kind of lurking behind our computer screens that could be a danger.
Right. And, the cause of it gets blamed to be that. And that was a thing around the time. I mean, we're talking about violence in video games. And back in the 90s to the early 2000s, it was a thing. It was like violence caused people to be violent. Like violence in video games led you to be violent. That was what people would say. You had to be careful with these ratings. That's why the ratings had to be created and everything. But now let's look as time went on, and you look at the original Doom compared to some of the things we have nowadays.
Even 2016's Doom, like we're talking a universe of difference.
Oh yeah,
in terms of the viscerality of the violence, the realistic nature of everything. And, while a lot of the games nowadays that we play have really moved away from, like, killing other people and, moving more towards monsters and demons and that kind of stuff, the level of graphical fidelity, the level of violence in games has not gone down at all. It's kind of risen and grown with the times.
It has kind of risen to a point I want to bring up that the game series Halo.
Yeah.
Halo 1, 2, 3, Reach, ODST were all rated mature.
Yeah.
I never understood.
I never understood either. Because there's nothing all that bad in them.
No,
I imagine there's probably some bad words here and there.
Probably from the one military character. I forget his name. Filthy Casual. Sorry.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is violence. You are shooting other beings, and then there's the multiplayer where
there's a little bit of blood,
but it's not realistic looking blood. It's not red. It's just But I never understood. Now you told me which one was it? Was it Halo 4 or Halo 5?
Yeah.
Halo 5 is rated teen.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it took me this long.
Yeah.
So I used to work at a game store, and actually some parents, which I give them props, would come up and ask me, like, why is this rated this way?
And that's a really great question to ask.
It is.
More parents need to do that in general. Yeah, that's the thing.
But when it came to Halo, they would always ask, why is this rated mature? And I would tell them, and I would be honest, that, like, this is the reason why, and I personally don't think that it's really that mature a game. And I told them, like, yes, there is language, yes, there is violence, but you're not shooting humans, you're not running into an airport and shooting innocent people. But but nowadays, most video games contain some sort of violence.
Oh, it's kind of, required now. Yeah. And now most of our video game interactions are actually directed towards each other. You know, it's so competitive. You know, almost everything. You know, Call of Duty, Fortnite, PUBG, Overwatch. All these games are kind of built around, you know, taking out other people and being really good at it.
And let's talk about Fortnite because it's one of the most popular things around. Fortnite is a shooter.
Yeah.
But it's cartoony.
Super cartoony.
There's no blood.
No.
But what are you doing in it?
You're killing people.
You're killing each other.
Yeah.
That's the point of the game.
And the point is to be the last one standing.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not even to be lucky or whatever. It's to ruthlessly take out all of your enemies.
Right.
You know. So even though the game itself isn't a terribly brutal realistic shooter, there's
still something about the themes to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what that does to people, what that sense of competition, that can also, put things on our radar.
Right, and that's how games are nowadays. I mean, we live in an online world where how many games do you find that don't have some kind of online component?
Like none.
Yeah. Even a game like
Yeah.
Persona 5
Yeah.
has an online component to it.
It's itty bitty.
It's itty bitty, but it's there. There's a connectivity, and we're always working against each other or working with each other, and there's violence around every corner. Mm-hmm. So then the question is, so does the violence affect us?
And the answer is, conclusively, we don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah. Now, it would be nice to... There's actually plenty of evidence, and when you go look, procon.org, if you ever want to debate anybody, link in the description. Procon.org, they have everything laid out there, what all the experts say, real, actual good research, no fake news, everything's legit. The majority of the scientific community does just have an inconclusive thing, that there is no link. Now, they can't say that it has no effect on people.
Right, because the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence.
Right. So, yeah, you can't prove a negative. That's just logic. That's just debate. That's just the way it works.
Now, you can go other places that say, yes, there is a correlation. Yeah. The APA specifically says that, yes, there is a correlation. But ever since this started back in the early to mid-90s, when we started getting these ratings, there have been multiple studies done with multiple groups of people. And the truth is depending on which study you look at, sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, sometimes it's inconclusive. Mm-hmm. The truth is there's no definitive study out there that says one way or the other. Mm-hmm. Now, the one thing we can look at is violence in video games has increased, I would say.
Yeah, but what about violence in our society?
It's gone down.
And that's, honestly, life in general has gotten better.
Right.
Since the mid-90s.
Now, you might say that the world's a terrible place now, but...
by every, testable metric in the entire world, we're in the best of times, And that includes crime, that includes, acts of violence, homicide, everything. Right. And so if there is any, crazy correlation, we should be seeing a rise in violence, and we're not seeing it. So that's the most we can say.
What can be said, and I'd like to offer this as a counterpoint to the whole thing, is not only has violence in video games been studied, but the benefits of gaming.
Yeah.
And the truth is some of those are conclusive.
Yeah.
Playing video games has an increase on hand-eye coordination. Mm-hmm. It has an increase in stress relief for quite a few people. It's a good way to kind of relax and kind of de-stress.
Mm-hmm. So when that person is screaming at you in Fortnite and telling you stuff about your mother, they're just probably actually trying to get their stress out.
It happens.
Probably.
It happens.
They also just might be,
they might just
jerkwads.
They might be. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to violence in video games, it's different for every person. It's inconclusive. We don't know what else to say. But it really comes down to it's parents. Mm-hmm. You got to make the right decision for your kids. There's ratings there. Make sure you pay attention to them. That's it. Mm-hmm. That's all we can say to this.
Yep. That's your friendly neighborhood nerds just giving you the skinny on violence in video games.
Right. We're not for it. We're not against it. Yeah. We're just here to kind of talk about it.
And we're really trying not to be preachy.
No.
Really. We're trying to be as intellectually honest as possible. And that's what ends up happening.
Right. That
we end up with a big fat, I don't know. That's the way it goes.
But it's important to the things that we like to talk about on here, so it's important to talk about now. But we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope you had a little bit of fun. Mm-hmm. Hope you learned a little bit of something, even though, as we said,
it's dark.
It's dark.
The world is a dark place.
But join us again some other time. We'll talk about something completely different. But for
We promise.
Yes. But for Nerdstrodamus, I'm Dr. Pants.
Lambo.
We'll catch you some other time.